I wonder if that is this thing that happens when you have a kid, a major milestone in your life. It's like brings back childhood trauma.
Yeah,
almost.
that's kind of cool. I like that.
And I wonder if the smothering fire is she has a kid and it's like all of this childhood trauma comes back and smothers her ability to properly be a mother.
Yeah, it's almost like she learned how to become the ideal woman in the wilderness and became queen. But when she became a mother, all that trauma came rushing back.
Yeah.
That may be it. I like that.
Yeah, I wonder if that's, yeah. That's interesting. It occurred to me when you said that you called it smothering fire. I'm like, yeah, that's the smothering stepmother coming back.
Yeah. Oh, well, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll take that little tidbit and stick it at the front. That'll be the intro.
Okay, yeah, that's true. All right, so we've been getting some feedback from some of our listeners, and I think from some of our listeners, one reminder that's good to throw out there for people is that when you just listen to one of these fairy tales once, or if you read it, just read it once, a lot of these things aren't going to jump out at you.
Yeah.
Because some of our listeners were saying, well, I'm not getting what you're getting out of it, but I've only listened to it once. And so maybe just up front, I think we should acknowledge that you and I have read through all these Grimm fairy tales. We text back and forth, say, hey, read this one. But then once we decide on which ones we're doing, like I read through them several times. And at least my experience is I can read through them 5 or 6 times.
Right.
And I see something different every single time. And then you and I have conversations about it.
Right.
And so don't expect to be there at that point when you just first listen to this fairy tale that we're going to talk about today, or any of them.
Yeah, and when you and I talk, it kind of adjusts the way I view it also. So just the conversation kind of sands off some of the rough edges and helps me see things in a different way. And I think the fact that we started off with Red Riding Hood is one that everybody knows. So it was easy to kind of listen to that one and say, yeah, I know that story, and to kind of follow along with our commentary on it. But some of these others, the one we're going to do today is not very well known. So you probably haven't heard it. So it's very difficult to listen to this one. This is the complex one, but it's difficult to listen to a complex fairy tale or a story or a myth and immediately be able to say, oh, it just pop in your head. That's what this is about. Yeah. Well,
yeah.
And also if you prefer, you can see all these online. These are all public domain. So you can just Google Red Riding Hood Grimm or One Eye, Two Eye, Three Eye Grimm, and the story will come up. And you can, if you kind of prefer, if you're at work, if you have a screen, you can kind of read through it. And it's a little bit different when you read it than when you listen to it. You kind of get a little bit different takes. You highlight things. And yeah, we'd encourage that. If you prefer reading, Google any of these and you'll find them online without any difficulty.
Yeah, that's right. So bottom line is we don't expect you to listen to this once and all of these things that jump out at you that we're going to talk about. Because that's not what we're doing. We're being upfront about that. You and I discussed these several times, and you see things that I don't see. I see things that you don't see. And through that conversation, and we try to capture some of that on each episode, kind of that live moment where a light bulb goes off.
Oh, yeah.
But, we kind of come to a pattern that seems to fit the entire fairy tale. But yeah, to your point today, we're going to talk about the brother and the sister. I don't think you and I have totally landed on a really satisfying pattern that runs all through this fairy tale. But there's a lot of really interesting symbolism and meaning in this story as well.
Yeah, we'll be doing this on the fly a little bit. And this might be one of those episodes where at the end of it, we're like going, man, tomorrow it'll hit me. And I wish we may have to record an extra section or something like that where we figure this out. Because lots of times when we're done, we're like, man, why didn't we say this? Why didn't we say that? Right. But that's just kind of part of the conversation, the way this works.
Well, and in fact, you text me about a week ago, and you said something like, I've been thinking about the brother and sister. I laid awake till 2 a.m, and I think I'm onto something.
Yeah.
And that's how these fairy tales work, right?
Yeah.
Like, they stick in your head. They're easy to remember, but once you start looking for those patterns and those symbols, there's a bigger meaning going on.
Yeah, it got in my head.
Sometimes it'll just hit you.
Yeah. Yeah, and exactly that. I was just staring at the ceiling, running through all the, kind of the story, and stuff makes a lot more sense at 2 a.m. it may completely fall apart when you wake up and try to write it down. You're like, what was I thinking? But anyway, at the time I was like, man, this is making sense, man. And I think I do have a little bit of an idea on how to break this down, but it's a little bit disjointed and a little bit complex. So anyway, don't listen to the story and think that you're supposed to have this figured out, because we sat up many nights trying to figure it out ourselves.
That's right. That's right. And I do think this was one of the first ones that you and I were talking about when I was at your place at Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
I think this is one of the first ones that were like, have you read this one? What do you think? Maybe we should talk about these things more, So it'd be fun to revisit that as well.
Well, yeah, when we were talking about it at Thanksgiving, it was the type of thing. I think the reason we liked this one so much is there were so many symbolic elements that while maybe the whole story didn't make sense to us, we kept seeing this recurrence of the symbolic elements of the wilderness and the castle and things like that. And so we kind of thought it'd be a good idea to start this conversation off with, kind of revisit. I think we did this back in Judges, the series where we kind of talked about the wilderness camp, right? This would be a good one to kind of revisit that idea of the wilderness and the camp and the fringes. Why don't you walk through that before we hear this story? Because I think some of those elements are going to play out as we hear this fairy tale.
Yeah, so there's a common pattern that's laid out, and once you see it in the ancient world, once you see it, you start to see it everywhere. It's all through the Bible. Like once you know the pattern to look for, it's all through the Bible. And I think we've referenced it several times in various episodes. But what's interesting to me is you start to see it in these fairy tales too, because again, this is pre-Enlightenment. This is the ancient way of thinking. And so there's this pattern of the way the city and the wilderness and the unknown is laid out. So typically what you'll have is you'll have a city or a town. And in the Bible, you can think of it as the temple or a holy mountain sometimes is at the center of the town, because that's the center point, right? That's the axis of that society.
Right.
So around the holy mountain or around the tent or the tabernacle, you have the leaders of the various tribes, and then you have basically what you would say the citizens of that town, right?
Right.
And that's kind of a basic pattern. But then at the edge of town is where you encounter the fringe. And so sometimes we talk about the fringe, right? Mm-hmm. I think we talked about that last episode even. Well, when we're talking about the fringe, that's what we're talking about. People who have a place in that society, but they shouldn't be at the center of town, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
Because the center of town, that's where, that's the holy mountain, all that. So the fringe is the people who have a place in society, but what would you say? If they have too much influence, and this is going back to last fairy tale, things start to go awry, okay?
Right.
And in the Bible, you see different groups of people at the edge of the camp, right? Or at the fringes of what the national boundaries of Israel, things like that.
Okay.
Right?
Right.
So then, once you move past that, then you have the wilderness. And the wilderness motif is all through Scripture, right? What's interesting, and we've mentioned this several times, is in these Grimm's fairy tales, the wilderness is the woods, because this is in medieval Europe, right? The great forest, right?
Right.
And so when someone leaves the known of society, they enter the woods. And just looking ahead at this fairy tale right now, in the very first paragraph, the brother and sister say, let's go out into the wide world. And then they came to the great wood.
Right.
Right? So that's a clue right there.
Yeah.
They're entering the wilderness. And we've talked about the wilderness, just to revisit. It's the place of danger. It's also the place of opportunity. It's often the place where you can get out of your normal routine and actually encounter God also.
Right. A place of testing also.
That. Yeah, it's a lot of things, but you don't encounter it in the town, basically.
Right.
Right? And so then beyond the wilderness, you just have, in the ancient world, just the general unknown. It could be the next kingdom, but it also could be an unknown people that are going to be hostile to you.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, just the outsider is beyond the wilderness. And the outsider could be benevolent, it could be terrible, right? It's just complete unknown.
Yeah, so that's a very typical pattern. On the website, and I'll put a link to it, I actually wrote an article that describes the pattern of the wilderness camp for some other stuff we're doing. So there is an article on there if you want to kind of read through it and understand it a bit more that kind of lays it out. I'll put that link in the show notes. But you do see similar patterns in these fairy tales. So often the next kingdom is across the great woods. And that next kingdom represents the unknown. You said the outsider, right? They could be friendly, they could be hostile. It could represent a whole transformation, or it could represent a threat.
At the very least, it represents a new idea, a new way of thinking. As far as the fairy tale motif goes, if you go to the next kingdom, they usually think about things differently. And so it's whether we adopt that, whether we accept the new kingdom and are integrated into it, or it remains on the outside, whether it remains a distant land, right? And so it typically is kind of the new ideas, new ways of thinking. I don't know. That's the way I think of the neighboring kingdoms. They think differently.
Yeah, that's true. It's a new idea that's going to come in contact and maybe clash some with how we've always done things in this village.
You're right.
And what's interesting is one of the motifs you see, and we'll see it again in this one, is transformation happens because someone left the village or the house, right, went through the woods and encountered a king or a prince from the next kingdom over. And that's that contact with the new idea. And that's often when transformation takes place.
Yeah. And this is, I mean, look, psychology talks about this, from moving into the known to the unknown. That's where you learn. That's where you grow. Where you can't really grow if you stay at home, if you're living in mom and dad's basement, right? And so these stories are always being drawn out of what you know into the unknown so you can grasp opportunity and grow and become something different. And this is a wonderful story. It definitely has that theme all through it, but it also kind of has that psychology. Well, we'll get into it afterward, but psychology 101, we're going to have to tackle some of that to understand this. But yeah, stepping out of what you know so that you can widen your understanding. That's the purpose of stepping into the unknown.
Yeah. Again, once you have that pattern in your head, you'll start to see little hints of it all through these stories. And so we thought we'd just lay it out for our audience really quick again. I know we've covered it before. I know we've hinted at it throughout some of these stories, but I thought it'd just be a good time to lay that out. Today, we're going to talk about the fairy tale, The Brother and the Sister. And just a couple tidbits, and then we'll listen to the story. But I think this one is actually probably one of the older ones. And one of the things that you and I heard somewhere else is that this may be a precursor to the whole story of Hansel and Gretel.
Right.
Which I thought was kind of interesting.
Yeah, you can see it at the beginning of it. Now, the entire story kind of takes a different turn from what you understand of Hansel and Gretel. But yeah, it's almost like the Hansel and Gretel story was taking the first part of this story and sort of refining it a little bit.
Yeah, and then adding the back part of this story as well. So,
right.
Anything else you want to talk about before we go ahead and play this fairy tale?
Yeah, look for the wilderness kind of transition in the new kingdom, but also recognize that it's kind of, you'll see it presented in three parts. To your point about the Hansel and Gretel story, it's almost like they took the first part of this story and made the Hansel and Gretel story that we know out of the first part. But then you got to go into the second part and the third act, and it takes on a little bit different life. But it's almost like as you listen, there'd be little things that pop in your head like, oh, I wonder if this is about the development of a child. I wonder if this is about trying to hold back someone's masculinity. There's going to be little things that pop in your head all through this, but focus on all the imagery, and a lot of these things will pop out, and you'll see why this story is so intriguing to us from the very beginning. But then pulling it all together, that's going to be the challenge of this episode, and we'll do our best to do it. But yeah, kind of let your mind run with some of this imagery that you're about to see, and it's a fun listen. You'll enjoy it.
Yeah, so here's the brother and the sister.
The brother took his sister's hand and said to her, "Since our mother died, we have had no good days. Our stepmother beats us every day, and if we go near her, she kicks us away. We have nothing to eat but hard crust of bread left over. The dog under the table fares better. He gets a good piece every now and then. If our mother only knew how she would pity us. Come, let us go together out into the wide world." So they went and journeyed the whole day through the fields and meadows and stony places. And if it rained, the sister said, "The skies and we are weeping together." In the evening they came to a great wood, and they were so weary with hunger and their journey so long that they climbed up into a high tree and fell asleep. The next morning when they awoke, the sun was high in the heaven and shone brightly through the leaves. Then said the brother, "Sister, I am thirsty. If I only knew where to find a brook that I might go and drink. I almost think that I hear one rushing." So the brother got down and led his sister by the hand, and they went to seek the brook. But their wicked stepmother was a witch, and had known quite well that the two children had run away, and had sneaked after them, as only witches can, and had laid a spell on all the brooks in the forest. So when they found a little stream flowing smoothly over its pebbles, the brother was going to drink of it. But the sister heard how it was saying in its rushing, "He a tiger will be who drinks of me. Who drinks of me a tiger will be." Then the sister cried, "Pray, dear brother, do not drink, or you will become a wild beast and will tear me to pieces." So the brother refrained from drinking, though his thirst was great, and he said he would wait until he came to the next brook. When they came to a second brook, the sister heard it say, "He a wolf will be who drinks of me. Who drinks of me a wolf will be." Then the sister cried, "Pray, dear brother, do not drink, or you will be turned into a wolf and will eat me up." So the brother refrained from drinking and said, "I will wait until we come to the next brook, and then I must drink, whatever you say, because my thirst is so great." And when they came to the third brook, the sister heard how in its rushing it said, "Who drinks of me a fawn will be. He a fawn will be who drinks of me." Then the sister said, "Oh, my brother, I pray drink not, or you will be turned into a fawn and will run far away from me." But he had already kneeled by the side of the brook and stooped and drunk of the water. And as the first drops passed his lips, he became a fawn. And the sister wept over her brother, and the fawn wept also, and stayed sadly beside her. At last the maiden said, "Be comforted, dear fawn. Indeed, I will never leave you." Then she untied her golden girdle and bound it round the fawn's neck, and went and gathered rushes to make a soft cord, which she fastened to him. And then she led him on, and they went deeper into the forest. And when they had gone a long, long way, they came at last to a little house, and the maiden looked inside. And as it was empty, she thought, "We might as well live here." And she fetched leaves and moss to make a soft bed for the fawn. And every morning she went out and gathered roots and berries and nuts for herself, and fresh grass for the fawn, who ate it out of her hand with joy. At night, when the sister was tired and had said her prayers, she laid her head on the fawn's back, which served a pillow for her, and softly fell asleep. And if only the brother could have got back his own shape again, it would have been a charming life. So they lived a long while in the wilderness alone. Now it happened that the king of the country held a great hunt in the forest. The blowing of the horns, the barking of the dogs, and the lusty shouts of the huntsmen sounded throughout the wood, and the fawn heard them and was eager to be among them. "Oh," he said to his sister, "do let me go to the hunt. I cannot stay behind any longer," and begged so long that at last she consented. "But mind," she said to him, "come back to me at night. I must lock my door against the wild hunters, so in order that I may know you, you must knock and say, 'Little sister, let me in.' And unless I hear that, I shall not unlock the door." Then the fawn sprang out and felt glad and merry in the open air. The king and his huntsmen saw the beautiful animal and began at once to pursue him in their hunt. But they could not come within reach of him, for when they thought they were certain of him, he sprang away over the bushes and disappeared. As soon as it was dark, he went back to the little house and knocked at the door and said, "Little sister, let me in." Then the door was opened to him, and he went in and rested the whole night long on his soft bed. The next morning the hunt began anew, and when the fawn heard the hunting horns and the tally-ho of the huntsmen, he could rest no longer, and said, "Little sister, let me out. I must go." The sister opened the door and said, "Now mind, you must come back at night and say those same words." When the king and his hunters saw the fawn with the golden collar again, they chased him closely, but he was too nimble and swift for them. This lasted the whole day, and at last the hunters surrounded him, and one of them wounded his foot a little, so that he was obliged to limp and to go slowly. Then a hunter slipped after him to the little house and heard him as he called out, "Little sister, let me in," and saw how the door opened and shut again after him directly. The hunter noticed all this carefully, and he went to the king and told him all that he had seen and heard. Then said the king, "Tomorrow we will hunt again." But the sister was terrified when she saw that her fawn was wounded. She washed his foot, laid cooling leaves around it, and said, "Lie down on your bed, dear fawn, and rest that you may soon be well." The wound was very slight, so that the fawn felt nothing of it the next morning, and when he heard the noise of the hunting outside, he said, "I cannot stay in. I must go after them. I shall not be taken as easily again." The sister began to weep and said, "I know you will be killed, and I, left alone here in the forest and forsaken of everybody, I cannot let you go." "Then I shall die here with longing," answered the fawn. "When I hear the sound of the horn, I feel as if I should leap out of my skin." Then the sister, seeing that there was no help for it, unlocked the door with a heavy heart, and the fawn bounded away into the forest well and merry. When the king saw him, he said to his hunters, "Now follow him all day long until at night comes, and see that you do him no hurt." So as soon as the sun had gone down, the king said to the huntsman, "Now come and show me this little house in the wood." And when he got to the door and knocked at it and cried, "Little sister, let me in," the door opened, the king went in, and there stood a maiden more beautiful than any he had seen before. The maiden shrieked out when she saw, instead of the fawn, a man standing there with a gold crown on his head. But the king looked kindly on her, took her by the hand, and said, "Will you go with me to my castle and be my dear wife?" "Oh, yes," answered the maiden, "but the fawn must come too. I could not leave him." And the king said, "He shall remain with you as long as you live, and shall lack nothing." Then the fawn came bounding in, and the sister tied the cord of rushes to him and led him by her own hand out of the little house. The king put the beautiful maiden on his horse and carried her to his castle, where the wedding was held with great pomp. So she became Lady Queen, and they lived together happily for a long while. The fawn was well tended after and cherished, and he gabbled about the castle garden. Now the wicked stepmother, whose fault it was that the children were driven out into the world, never dreamed but that the sister had been eaten up by wild beasts in the forest, and that the brother, in his likeness of a fawn, had been slain by hunters. But when she heard that they were so happy, and that things had gone so well with them, jealousy and envy arose in her heart and left her no peace. And her own chief thought was how to bring misfortune upon them. Her own daughter, who was ugly as sin and had only one eye, complained to her and said, "I never had the chance of being a queen." "Never mind," said the old woman to satisfy her. "When the time comes, I shall be at hand." After a while, the queen brought a beautiful baby boy into the world. And that day the king was out hunting. The old witch took the shape of a bedchamber woman and went into the room where the queen lay and said to her, "Come, your bath is ready. It will give you refreshment and new strength. Quick, or it will be cold." Her daughter was within call, so they carried the sick queen into the bathroom and left her there. And in the bathroom they made a great fire so as to suffocate the beautiful young queen. When that was managed, the old woman took her daughter, put a cap on her, and laid her in the bed in the queen's place. She gave her also the queen's form and countenance, only she could not restore the lost eye. So in order that the king might not notice it, she had to lie on the side where there was no eye. In the evening, when the king came home and heard that a little son has been born to him, he rejoiced with all his heart and was going at once to his dear wife's bedside to see how she did. Then the old woman cried hastily, "For your life, do not draw back the curtains to let the light upon her. She must be kept quiet." So the king went away and never knew that a false queen was lying in the bed. Now, when it was midnight and everyone was asleep, the nurse who was sitting by the cradle in the nursery and watching there alone saw the door open and the true queen come in. She took the child out of the cradle, laid it at her bosom, and fed it. Then she shook out its little pillow, put the child back again, and covered it with its coverlet. She did not forget the fawn either. She went to him where he laid in the corner and stroked his back tenderly. Then she went in perfect silence out at the door. And the nurse the next morning asked the watchman if anyone had entered the castle during the night, but they said they had seen no one. And the queen came many nights after that and never said a word. The nurse saw her every time, but did not dare speak of it to anyone. After some time had gone by in this manner, the queen seemed to find voice and said one night, "My child, my fawn, twice more I come to see. Twice more I come, and then the end must be." The nurse said nothing, but as soon as the queen had disappeared, she went to the king and told him all. The king said, "Ah, heaven, what do I hear? I will myself watch by the child tomorrow night." So at evening he went into the nursery, and at midnight the queen appeared and said, "My child, my fawn, once more I come to see. Once more I come, and then the end must be." And she tended to her child, as she was accustomed to do, before she vanished. The king not dared speak to her, but he watched her again the following night, and heard her say, "My child, my fawn, this once I come to see. This once I come, and now the end must be." Then the king could contain himself no longer, but rushed toward her, saying, "You are no other than my dear wife." Then she answered, "Yes, I am your wife." And in that moment, by the grace of heaven, her life returned to her, and she was once more well and strong. Then she told the king the snare that the wicked witch and her daughter had laid for her. The king had them both brought to judgment, and sentence was passed upon them. The daughter was sent away into the wood, where she was devoured by the wild beast, and the witch was burned and ended miserably. And as soon as her body was in ashes, the spell was removed from the fawn, and he took human shape again. And then the sister and brother lived happily together until the end.
Okay, there you go. Yet another strange, kind of disjointed story that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense until you get a framework for the story that's trying to be told. And this one, man, is complex. So right away, there doesn't seem to be, or at least it didn't pop out to me, it doesn't seem to be an obvious, simple moral layer to it. Did you happen to see one?
No, well, there's a common trope that you see in fairy tales in this one, but no, there's not. You don't listen to this one and say, "Oh, here's the simple moral of the story." If you were reading this to a kid, right?
Right.
Say, "Okay, what did this mean?" And they'd say, "Oh, okay, be nice to your friends." There's nothing like that in this story, I think, that jumps out at you.
Yeah, that was the first thing I noticed.
So yeah, I would agree with that.
Red Riding Hood, it was, stay on the path, obey your mother, right? And then you can get into the deeper understanding of it. But there didn't seem to be just a simple moral lesson that popped out to me. I just didn't see it.
No, yeah, I think it's a little multifaceted. There's a lot of symbolism going on here. Like we said at the outset, I think in some sense, I think you and I are still wrestling with an overall pattern, and maybe it'll strike us as we have this conversation here about the fairy tale.
Yeah. Well, okay. So off the bat, I also say that I had trouble. My trouble with this fairy tale is that I had a hard time coming up with the unifying narrative across all three sections of story. Did you run into the same thing, or did you kind of look at it that way?
Yeah, so when you talk about the three sections, you talk about what the brother and sister in the woods, What are the three sections?
Well, okay,
first of
so
all, that you're talking about?
and there may be more, but kind of what popped out to me is it's presented in three parts. So you have like the running away, right? The birth mother dies and they have to escape this abusive stepmother. So they run into the wilderness or the woods, and then you kind of, the second section is the call of the hunt, right? Living in the wilderness and avoiding the hunters. And then the third section, this was the hardest section for me, was sort of the, what do you call it? The ghost of the queen, right? The spirit of the sister taking care of both the child and the brother, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's meant to be seen that way because at the end of each of those sections, there's a phrase that implies that a length of time passes, right? It says after they ran away and the brother gets turned into a fawn or a deer, it says, so they lived a long while in the wilderness alone, right? So there's this kind of chapter heading right there. They got away they got away from the stepmother and they lived in the wilderness a long time. And then after she marries the king, it says they lived together happily for a long while, right? So there's kind of these clear division between the three sections. And like I said earlier, all three parts had some pretty interesting meanings by themselves, but I had trouble getting a consistent narrative across all three sections. And I don't know, I was kind of wondering if you would break it down the same way or if you had a different take on kind of the narrative arc, or if that's the way you saw it.
We'll probably talk about this at the end, but I do think I've landed on something like this is what happened when you take the brother, right, the male, and the sister, the female, and the curse of the mother seems to be something like this is what happens when you restrain their growth and keep each of them from being fully what it means to be male and female. And I know that's a big narrative arc, but I think that might start to cover everything you hear in the story, right?
Okay. No, that's good. That's good.
So we'll see if that plays out.
Something similar. I'll wait for a little bit later. But no, that's what I was getting at is did you find something that kind of a nice thread that tied all three sections together? And that's a pretty good one. But we'll get into that here in a little bit. Yeah, where do you want to start? Do you just want to start off with what? Some of the obvious characters? Or do you just want to start going through the first section?
Well, yeah, we'll start with the first section, but let's start off with the fact that they're orphans and the stepmother beats them every day. And then it's I think this is the one where they later actually say the stepmother is actually a witch. They actually just say, like, she was a witch all along, right?
Yeah.
But I thought it was interesting because remember the setting now. These are, medieval Europe, right?
Right.
And I was thinking, why is it's always the stepmother, right? It's always the wicked stepmother.
Yeah.
And I just wonder if, so I wonder if at that time, or maybe you could even say throughout most of history, marriages were a lot out of necessity.
Right.
Right. And a lot of women died at childbirth. A lot of men died in battle. And so you had, I think this is true, you had a lot of mixed marrying, right?
Yeah.
Like, my wife died at childbirth, and now I need to find a new wife, not out of love, almost out of necessity.
Right, to raise the children while I'm working the farm, that type of stuff.
To raise the children, or vice versa. Yeah, I lost my husband in the war, and now I'm left with these two kids, and if I'm going to survive, I have to find another husband.
Right.
So I just thought it was kind of interesting. I don't know what you think about that idea, but I wonder if so many of these fairy tales have a wicked stepmother because of the practicality of that there may have actually truly been a lot of blended marriages going on. And of course, in those days, it's a fight for survival. And you may see the stepchildren as a threat to your own children. Today we don't think about that, right?
Right. Well, there's lots of blended marriages.
Of blended families that...
Yeah.
Sure.
Blended marriages today, blended families today. But I think, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, it was a lot more out of necessity. The husband had to work the field. The wife had to raise the kids and work the home. The kids were often, as soon as they were of age, they had to work the fields and help put food on the table. I mean, a lot of this stuff was about survival, and everybody had to play their role. And so when there was a breakup of the typical family, then families had to come together and try to fulfill those same roles, right? So a new mother comes in and, it's not mom, but she still has to raise the kids. She still has to tend the house and around the house. And there's plenty of work to be done. So nobody's just sitting back on the couch, watching reruns. Everybody's pitching in to do their thing. And so when that breaks up, it just messes up the whole pattern of things. And so I think the stepmother motif is very common because I think right at the beginning, it's just a way of saying the typical pattern of this family has been broken. Either the father's gone, and of course, there's no father mentioned, so we're to assume that the father is gone, dead, whatever, right? And so this family is broken from the very beginning.
Yeah, but it seems to be a typical scenario. But that's where, and I think you always remind me of this, that's where you always have said that the family represents society at large too. And so also, I think it's important to see when you see the wicked stepmother, to see what the wicked stepmother almost represents like a society that is not working anymore and transformation has to take place.
Yeah, it's something like that.
And in a fairy tale, that's the wicked stepmother, right?
Right. No,
well, I guess I say all that just to say that don't read these as, man, what do they got against stepmothers? You know, all these things represent something. And this just happens to be another trope where you have the wicked stepmother who's basically abusing the stepkids, right?
Yeah. So you can always see the wicked stepmother, that she sort of represents an oppressive, a twisted, a kind of a broken maternal control, right? And this is in opposition to the fairy godmother, which represents the proper maternal wisdom. And so there are fairy tales with fairy godmothers and things like that sort of point to the ideal. But to your point, yes, most of these start off with some sort of broken situation in a family to represent a broken situation in society. And I think that's that's probably the way to view this.
All right, so we have the wicked stepmother. The brother and the sister say the mother beats them every day. We have hard crust left over. The dog fares better than us, right? And again, I think that's interesting. Like, this is a society that's broken, like, needs some kind of transformation. So the brother and the sister say, come, let us go out into the wide world.
Yeah, that ought to be a pretty good indication right there that this is what, like you said about the wilderness, right? Let's go out and find something new. The way we're living right now isn't working for us. Let's go out into the dangerous wide world, but at least there's an opportunity of something different.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And a couple lines later, it actually says, then they came to the great woods. So we are definitely in the wilderness now.
Yeah.
We've left the confines of home and we are in the wilderness.
Right.
And in this case, they feel like they didn't have a choice because the home structure is completely broken, right? So whatever's in the wilderness has got to be better. You know, the dog lives better than we do back at home. So that's what they're doing. They set off.
Yeah.
Okay, so then they go into the woods, and this is one that, again, I had some trouble with. The brother says he's thirsty, right?
Mm-hmm.
Understandably. They're out in the woods. And so he says, the next brook that I find, I'm going to drink. Okay, so they find the stream, and then there's this weird thing, and it happens 3 times. The sister, and we're not really told how, but the sister hears in the rushing of the stream a curse, kind of words uttered or something that the stepmother, that's now revealed to be a witch, had put on the children.
Yeah, she laid a spell on the brooks in the forest, it says.
Yeah, so they come to the first one, and she hears the voice that says, he a tiger will be who drinks of me. Who drinks of me, a tiger will be. I guess at least the spirit rhymes really well.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So and then the sister panics and says, "Dear brother, you can't drink." Okay. So here's my question, though. I wrestled with why is it? Okay, a couple things. First of all, the brother seems to be thirsty, and understandably so. But the sister doesn't ever say that she was really thirsty too. And then the second one is why is it the sister is the one that can hear whatever, the spirit of the brook or the curse of the brook, and the brother can't hear it? I guess that was the first big question for me.
Right. I had trouble with that one also, but I've kind of got a theory about this whole thing, and maybe I'll just spill it to see if it holds true. But it's this kind of this duality theory that the brother and the sister represent the dual nature of an individual, right? There is no actual brother and actual sister. Both represent sort of different aspects of ourselves, right? And so I told you we were going to have to jump into some psychology here, right? Freud, I think, is the one who came up with, right? Freud came up with the id, right? That's that primitive, instinctual, impulsive part of the psyche, right? And then you have the ego. That's the rational, reality-oriented part that mediates between the id and the external world, right? And then you got the superego, and that's sort of an internalized, that's like the moral standard. That's the ideal. And so this story obviously predates Freud, but I think it's wrestling with some of the same ideas that Freud formally outlines, right? The running away from the stepmother is sort of breaking away from mother and gaining independence. But to your point right here, where the brother is the only one that's thirsty, why isn't the sister thirsty? Well, the brother represents the impulsive, right? And I also think it's a good, I think that another good way to understand this is that the story seems to start focusing more on the brother, right? So it's almost like it starts the focus on the impulsive idea of the brother. But as the story progresses, the sister becomes kind of the primary focus, meaning that the impulsive side has been tamed and is less of an obstacle to a mature integration of rationality and meaning into somebody's life. So that's kind of the way I see that. But starting out in this part, I think the answer to your question is because the brother represents the impulsive side of us, and the sister represents a little bit more of the rational side of us. Do you think that makes sense?
Yeah. Well, I also think you don't have to go all the way up to Freud, I think, to get there, because it's a brother and a sister, right? And we assume kind of maybe they're the same age. This is always coming of age, so we know there's some like adolescence, But I guess along those same lines, then I would also say that, well, look, I mean, girls mature faster than boys, right?
Yeah.
And so I think in a very practical sense, it's like I could see that he's the one that's impulsive. He's got a drink. He's thirsty. I want to drink. I want to drink now.
Right.
And we'll see this progress throughout the story. And I just wonder if it's more like as they're both growing up and maturing, like she's actually maturing more faster. And so she is kind of tuned in to, I don't know, whatever the stream, what the dangers of the stream, the dangers of the spell. And he's just, 10-year-old boy out in the woods. He's not paying attention to anything.
Yeah.
That's just the age that he's at. I don't know, something like that. So maybe a step in between the fairy tale and Freud would be this idea of just natural development. It's like, yeah, she's already ahead of him just because she's a girl, right? Something like that.
The sister's already 3 steps ahead of the brother, which is, that typically is the way it comes to maturity. You're exactly right. So maybe it is that simple.
All right. So they come to the first stream. The stream says, whoever drinks of me will become a tiger. And the sister says, no, brother, you can't do that, right? So later on, because again, he's thirsty. He wants a drink. He wants a drink now, right? Mm-hmm. They come to the next stream. This is the progression. And the sister hears, this time it's a wolf. He a wolf will be who drinks of me. Who drinks of me, a wolf will be. And the sister again says, brother, can't drink. Control your thirst. We'll find something. We'll find another alternative. You can't do it. And the brother finally says, this is the third one, because things happen in 3 in fairy tales, right? Talked about that last time.
Yep.
He says, I'm so thirsty. The next brook I come to, I'm going to drink of it. I don't care what happens. Which, again, is that impulsiveness, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this time, the stream says, who drinks of me, a fawn will be. He a fawn will be who drinks of me. The brother says, I don't care. He takes a drink, and as the first drops past his lips, he becomes a fawn. Okay, so let's stop right there, because we've seen this progression from tiger to wolf to fawn. Now, it's like, which one of these things don't belong, right?
Right, right.
You have these fierce animals and then almost the most helpless animal you can think of. So what are your thoughts on this first progression of the 3 streams and, why the tiger and the wolf, and then ultimately it's just a fawn?
Yeah, I think, again, kind of to tame that impulsive nature. You start off with a tiger, which is, again, we're in Germany, right? This is where these folk tales come from. And so a tiger in Germany is obviously danger, but it's exotic. It's completely unfamiliar to locals in the German woods, right? It's the unknown monster.
Oh, okay.
And then it progresses, I would say, down to a wolf, which is still a predator, but it's a more typical predator of the European forest, right? It's dangerous, but it's also possibly tameable, right? Domestication of wolves is how we got dogs, and so a seasoned local would probably know how to handle a wolf. The huntsman in Red Riding Hood knew exactly how to handle a wolf, and so it's kind of...
Yeah, okay.
It's slightly less dangerous and certainly less exotic. And then the final is a fawn, right, a deer, which is a complete prey animal that doesn't fight back, and so there's no risk at all in taming. So again, to go back to the idea of controlling the impulsive nature, if the brother gives in right of way, right, the first stream he comes to, then he'll become this completely savage beast. But since he listens to his sister, since he listens to the rational side, at the next stream, he kind of becomes something dangerous, but possibly tameable, right? To become the wolf. But he didn't give in to either one of those. And since he was able to hold off till the third time, then he's able to sort of become a fawn, which is a completely tame animal. And so you can kind of see this predatorial feature shrinking each time the brother heeds his sister's warning. So that plays into my idea of the rational side taming the impulsive side, this sort of lower progression of more tameable animal every time. At least that's the way I saw it. And it took me several times to kind of come up with that. Yeah, what did you take?
I was fascinated by this progression of the tiger, the wolf, and the fawn. And if you look at it as maybe the idea of maturing from boyhood to manhood, right? And for the sister, we'll do the same thing. It's like maturing from girlhood to womanhood. So here's the question I had. The sister says, with the tiger and the wolf, she said, you can't do this because, in fact, I'm reading it here. It said, pray, dear brother, do not drink or you will be turned into a wolf and will eat me up, right?
Right.
She's clearly terrified of what he will turn into. But then he turns into this fawn that's completely tame. And I guess the question I had is, does she just assume that as a tiger and a wolf that he would turn on her? Or might have served as her protector?
Right.
Because I think there's a thread in here that the sister, through no fault of her own, being a good sister, but we'll see it probably better in the next part. The sister is almost keeping, she's keeping her brother tame, almost overly tame.
Right.
And we'll really see that next time.
Well, there was the opportunity to have a wolf, which is tameable, but is also a protector. And I think, so the first time I read this is what popped out to me. This idea of she's continually telling him not to, follow his impulses. And at the end of the day, he becomes a fawn that she just has to take care of for the entire story, that is completely helpless.
Right.
And she's, she takes on the role of the mother now. She's his mother. She's his protector. She has to constantly make sure he's not leaving the hut that they make, that even when they move to the castle, he's just frolicking around the courtyard somewhere, right? She has to take care of him the rest of the story. And so she plays the role of the mother because she infantilizes the brother, and she kind of keeps him held back a little bit. Well, go ahead and respond to that, because that really was the first take that you and I both had on this.
Yeah, that's right. I guess one thought that I had is, I know that Jordan Peterson talks about this idea that to become a responsible, mature man, that you have to have a dangerous side of you. But then maturity is being able to control that, right?
Right.
You've heard him talk about that.
Sure.
And I guess I was thinking of that as this is the progression from this boy that will, he's on the road to becoming a man. And it's like, I like what you actually said. I didn't think about that. Of the tiger is almost this, you can almost think of it as like a mythical beast in the forest because it's not native to Germans,
I think that's the way they would have seen it.
So it's like this mythical beast of the forest, and then it's like a common predator, but then it's like totally helpless. And it's like somewhere in there, I feel like, the curse is that he would have been turned into this, but the potential at least is he could have been a dangerous beast that protected his sister. I guess I wasn't convinced that he would have turned on his sister.
Yeah, I wasn't sure about that either.
That's the thing. I was like, I wonder if the potential was there for him. And so maybe it's that trying to integrate, the dangerous part of him with the more tameable part of him. But what he ends up being is just like the most helpless creature of the woods, right?
Yeah.
You're a fawn, and without your mother deer there, it's like you're just food.
Yeah, exactly.
Basically, for the next thing that finds you.
Yeah,
right?
He could have been a formidable protector, and he ended up just being basically a pet. And I think the key to thinking that way is that it's something like overly taming the masculine, and suppressing the formidable protector. It goes on and it says that she untied her golden girdle, which is a great image there, and bound it round the fawn's neck. And so it's like this undergarment that we're going to tie as a
it's like a collar around the fawn, yeah.
Yeah, a collar around the neck of the deer, right? To kind of control where it goes. And yeah, it becomes a pet. Now you're leading it around by this golden girdle, which is such great imagery of sort of I don't know, you could really look into it and say the feminine controlling the masculine. But again, you could also look at it as the rational controlling the irrational or the animal. You could look at that either way.
Yeah, I do. That's one of these images from this story that I love that's unmistakable. Is here's this fawn, here's the brother, and he's being led around by his sister by her girdle. Like, if that's not the most emasculating image, right? If that's not thwarting his path to adulthood, it's such a great image. And I think, just to remind everyone, we said at the beginning that focus is on him, but the story's going to shift to where it focuses on her too. So we're talking a lot about the masculine, but we're going to talk about her later.
Right.
Okay, so he ends up becoming a fawn. He's led around by his sister by her golden girdle, and they go deeper into the woods, and they come to a little cottage. Okay, so they find a cottage. Now, there's one thing, and this is kind of the second act, basically, now.
Right.
And there's one thing in here, it jumped out at me again about the fifth time I read that. It said, at night, when the sister was tired and she had said her prayers, she laid her head on the fawn's back, and they slept.
Mm-hmm.
But it points out that she said her prayers. And I want to point out the same thing I did last time, I believe it was last time, is that it's a subtle way of saying, I think that she's more connected to the divine, right? Which may indicate that she's, again, a little more mature. But I also think it might be that subtle idea of like, how was she able to hear the spirit of the brook? How was she able to discern the curse? Well, she's saying her prayers at night, right?
Oh, okay. That's interesting.
So she's got that connection to the divine. That it's subtle, but it's the second story we've heard this in now.
Yeah, so you're saying she's...
an offhand reference.
Yeah, has a deeper spirituality than the brother.
Yeah, and she's able to recognize the curse to begin with when he's just oblivious to it, right?
Okay.
So, I don't know. I just throw that out there. I thought it was another little detail that it's the second time we've seen this now.
No, yeah, that's interesting. And I also thought it was interesting that at the end of this section, when they find the cottage, she says, and if only the brother could have gotten back his own shape again, it would have been a charming life. In other words, they're still in the wilderness, but they've gotten away from the wicked stepmother, and they're still in this transition place, but she would have been happy there because obviously they got away from the chaos of their home life, right? And so they're in the wilderness.
Yeah.
And if only her brother, it says that she wept for her lost brother earlier on somewhere in there. And so it's a recognition that the brother's gone, or at least part of the brother is gone. But yet she clearly has conversations with him later on in the story. It's not like they can't communicate or have a conversation, but she recognizes that part of her brother is lost. And that if only he was there, we could have had a nice, charming life in the wilderness in this cottage.
That was an interesting sentence, too, that jumped out at me because I had a little different take on it because it's almost somewhat naive, right, to think that if only my brother were actually a human being,
right,
that he and I could have lived in the forest, isolated from society, and we could have had a great little life. It's like, no, actually, your life is like out there. A job. It's like a family.
Yeah.
Get married, marry the prince, marry the princess, have children. All that's out there. But from her perspective in that moment, it's like, man, we could have had a nice little life if he was just human, and it could have just been he and I in this little cottage out in the wilderness. There's something very naive about that, I think.
Yeah, she escaped a certain set of problems only to pick up another set of problems, namely living in the wilderness and trying to find your own food and dealing with what that means, right? But in that initial moment, it's like if you ever camped out in the backyard thinking, man, I could do this all the time. And then by the morning, you get eaten up by mosquitoes and it's hot and you're like, yeah, forget it. At 3 a.m, you crawl back into your own bed, right? It's not as interesting as you thought it was going to be.
Yeah, usually how that goes is by middle of the night, you're back in your bed and, mom comes down the next day and it's like, oh, I thought you guys were going to camp out.
Yeah.
It was hot.
Yeah.
We were hungry. Like the kid, I was thirsty. I had to have a drink right now.
Yeah. But when you're busting open
the
candy bars around the campfire at 10 o'clock at night and you're past your bedtime, it seems awesome. You're like, this is great. We're making it, right?
Yeah.
So maybe you're right too.
This is all I ever need.
Yeah. What else do I need? And so I think you may be right that there may be some naivety about this idea of being able to make it in the wilderness and sort of stopping short of the ideal life in the castle being, you know what I mean, kind of what you're meant to be.
Yeah.
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 So, okay. So now we pivot to the hunt. And again, there's this line. So they lived a long while in the wilderness alone. And I don't think that word alone is a mistake.
Yeah.
It's almost like they lived there for a while. They figured out how to, make it in this cottage, but they were certainly alone. And then we kind of find out that the king held a great hunt. And now we have this other section that has this real neat imagery of the blowing of the horn, and the huntsman sounds this horn through the woods, and it just drives the brother crazy. He says, I've got to go out. I've got to go out and answer the call, right? And the sister is saying, nope, don't go out there. Don't leave me, begging him to stay in the cottage, right?
Right. Yeah, I thought that was interesting because the horn of the hunt does something to the brother. It drives him crazy. He says, I have to go out there and be a part of that. And at first I thought, man, that's weird. First of all, he's a deer, and who does he think they're going to hunt?
Right.
Well, they're going to hunt him.
Right. He's the prey here.
It's like, there's a little bit of he doesn't fully understand what's going on here. But there's something about that. Okay, so what if the sounding of the horn is almost that call to what your life could be? So you have the transition where the sister says, we would have a great life. It was just me and him out in the woods, right?
Right.
But the horn is almost that call. It's like waking him up to the potential of the world out there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is something like that.
Does that make sense?
No, that's the way it struck me, yes.
Yeah, and so he starts to go stir crazy. So this idea of just me and sister in the house alone suddenly is not that appealing to him anymore. Now he's still stuck as a little fawn, but still it's like, I have to go out there and participate in life. It's something like that.
Right. Well, you and I didn't have a sister, but it's a cute image of the brother saying, I just want to live with my sister and marry her. It's a cute image when you're 4, but when you're 15, that's like a problem, right? And so this horn is almost like a representation of, no, I'm calling out it's sort of like the call of, I don't want to keep saying the call of the masculine, because I don't want to couch this in masculine and feminine terms, but that's clearly what's going on, right? It's a call for the brother to embrace manhood, let's say, and move on to the next phase, at which the sister, interestingly enough, is trying to hold him back. In the first section, the sister was the voice of reason. Don't drink from the poison stream, right? It was the sister that was trying to kind of speak some rationality into the situation. But now it's the brother that's like trying to answer this call of becoming a man, and it's the sister now trying to hold him back, right? And I guess that ties into kind of goes back to the golden girdle. You know, she's kind of got her grip on him, and she doesn't want to let go because she doesn't want to be alone.
Yeah. So it's really interesting, this whole idea of the hunt. And I think there's 3. There again, we see the pattern of the 3, because this happens 3 times. And there's something weird about, or there's something I think really in this image of, he's the object of the hunt in some sense, but he feels this call to go participate in it, right? He has to go. And it says he evades them. He's quicker than them. He evades them. He makes it back to the house at night. But then the next morning, the same thing. He hears the horn and he says, I have to go out there again. And I almost picture this little kid. You know how it's like, I'm a little kid, but I want to go play basketball with all the big guys.
Yeah, right.
It's almost like, no, you'll get hurt. And it's like, no, but just let me go play out there.
Yeah.
It's something like that. It's that kind of image. And the sister, of course, is like, are you crazy? They'll get you. And he's like, no, I've got to go participate.
No, that's interesting because you're right. It's a dangerous game that he's wanting to go play. I mean, he's obviously the object of the hunt. As I was reading it the first time, I was certain that he was going to get shot, that the king was going to kill the brother. That's not what ended up happening. But that's the way, I don't know, that's the way the narrative kind of led me to believe. I was thinking, this is not good. He's going to get hunted and he's going to get caught. But then I think what's kind of interesting is that it says the king noticed that the fawn had the golden collar, right? So it's like they noticed the golden collar and realized, okay, there's something special about this fawn, this deer. And that's when they chased him and he led him to the sister's house, right?
Yeah, before we get to that part, did you make anything of, so the second time he goes out, it says one of them wounded his foot. And so he was limping along and going slowly. And then it says the sister said, oh, you're bleeding. And he said, no, it's no big deal. And by the next day he was fine. Did you know what to do with that detail?
Not really, other than the fact that this is obviously a dangerous game. He got hurt and he still had to go out the next morning. Little sister, let me out. I have to go, right? I mean, again, it's that kind of that call to manhood where I want to do something dangerous. I want to go skydiving. I want to free climb this rock face. There's something about it, that call, that makes you want to put yourself in a dangerous situation because that's the only time some people feel alive. Maybe it's a way of saying I'm trying to embrace life and all it has to offer, both the safe side that keeps me nice and warm in this cottage and the wild side that puts me in harm's way and actually has the potential to really kill me, right? And that's sort of that dual nature that we all kind of, maybe we don't feel like we're living life. And it goes back to that idea of order and chaos, right? That there's order in the camp, but we're called out to the wilderness and chaos so we can learn and expand our understanding of life and learn something new. I think that's kind of what that's representing there.
Yeah, and just as you were talking, you mentioned we didn't have sisters, but we did have 2 other brothers. So there were 4 boys in our family. And just occurred to me this idea of the fawn says he hurts his foot. How many times did our mom patch up a skinned knee, right? We fell off our bike, broken tooth, broken arm. It's like, look, if you have boys,
it's
almost
of it.
The picture I get is that, the sister almost panics and it's like, oh, you skinned your knee. And it's like, oh, God, please, It's like the new parent. Oh, he skinned his knee. You're like, well, yeah, that's the first of about 100
right.
times you're going to have to bandage something on this kid, right? So again, it's the pulling of the safety of the little cabin into the dangerous world, but the world is also where he's supposed to be.
Yeah.
And he's going to get scraped up and banged up, and that's fine. But the sister is still trying to come to grips with that. Maybe it's something like that.
It's why this really feels like a coming-of-age story in general. Because that's exactly it. Like you said, you've got the new parents that sort of panic over everything. And I heard someone ask Jordan Peterson one time, what was the most difficult part of being a parent? And he, how he pauses and thinks for a second, right? And his answer was something like knowing when to intervene and help and knowing when to let go. And that really is it. I mean, that's the hardest part of being a parent. When do I ignore the scraped knee? Or when do I see the kid falling and crying and saying, you're okay, just get up and rub some dirt on it, right? Is that being too harsh? Is that being should I be more sympathetic? And there's always kind of that pull of being a parent of how much should I do for this kid? Because I don't want to cripple him by doing something for him that he can do for him or herself. But at the same time, I don't want to obviously let him go wild and, get a call in the middle of the night from the cops like our parents did. That's a story for another time. You know what I mean? I mean, you just don't know where that balance is, and that's the hard thing. So that's why this really feels like a coming-of-age story in general.
Yeah. There's a quote in here where the third time, the fawn she says, I cannot let you go out. And he says, then I shall die here with longing.
Yeah.
And so it's almost this, for her, it's like, this is ideal. But for him, it's like, well, I'm just going to curl up and die here then. If this is life, if this is all that life has to offer, right?
Right.
Then that's, I guess, what I'll do. But the third time then, to kind of move the story along, the other thing that occurred to me is, so he limps home, and that's what enables one of the hunters to follow him. And then that's what ultimately the king says, follow that fawn and see where he's going. And then the king shows up at the house in the woods, right?
Right. Yeah, the king says to his hunters, now follow him all day long until the night comes, right? And see that you don't do him any harm. So that it's kind of this neat idea of he's no longer the hunted anymore. He's not they could have killed him, I guess, but the king is pointing out, no, don't hurt him, but just follow him. And it's because he recognized that golden collar on him. So, yes, so they follow him to the house. And so the king comes up and he plays like the brother and he says, little sister, let me in. And it says the door opened. The king went in and there stood a maiden more beautiful than any he had seen before. And so here comes the king acting like the brother to get let in the house. And now he's standing before the sister.
Yeah, and there's a couple things in here. So first of all, we talked about the fact, it says, there stood a maiden more beautiful than any he'd seen before. So we talked about that idea that beauty in fairy tales is like the ideal.
Right.
It means beautiful character. It means she's becoming, I almost take it as tucked away in the woods, she's actually becoming now the woman she should become, and she doesn't even realize it. She went into the woods a little girl, and when the king opens the door, now there's this beautiful, like the most beautiful woman he's ever seen.
Oh,
right?
that's interesting, because in the woods,
So there's that dynamic.
yeah, the brother answered his call to be a man, and the sister didn't really answer a call, but in the meantime became a beautiful woman.
Yeah, something like that.
Again, that's the wilderness. That's
Yeah.
the transformation of the wilderness.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
The second thing I want to point out that occurred to me, and I just read one of my notes, and I think this is really interesting. It says, the maiden shrieked out when she saw, instead of the fawn, a man standing there with a gold crown on his head. So I think it's really interesting because it points out that she saw a man, okay, with a gold crown on his head. Now, what she's been used to is a fawn with a gold girdle around its neck.
Yes.
And it's almost like the king walks in and she's like, oh my gosh, this is what a man should look like.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Yeah,
I've been, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like this is the proper place for the gold crown.
yes.
It
Okay,
should
no,
be
that's
on his
good.
head, not around. Yeah, what do you think of that?
No, that's good. I was sort of taking it to mean the boy left and then the king came in and took his place. Does that make any sense? Like the little brother is what ran out and then knocked on the door and said, little sister, let me in. But then here's this king. So it's almost like I kind of took it maybe to mean the transition of boyhood into the proper masculine form or something like that. But I like what you said about, because that doesn't really hold true throughout the rest of the story was my problem with that. But when you said the gold crown on his head as opposed to the gold collar around his neck, I think that's it. I think that's insightful. I think that may be exactly it, that she understood the proper place. So if gold in fairy tales represents the highest value, then up until now, the sister's highest value was in controlling her brother, right? Putting the collar around this fawn's neck.
Okay.
Yeah, and now she
Yeah,
sees that the
okay.
highest value actually should be on, to your point, onto the king's head. That's the proper image of manhood or the ultimate value. Yeah, that's really good. I like that.
Yeah, and it's again, these are little details that it's no mistake that, because I thought it was interesting the first couple times I read it, is the book said it's a gold girdle. And I'm like, well, that's weird.
Right.
And to your point, it's like, why do you take something that's the highest value and use it as like a belt or your underwear, right? Like
Yeah.
that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
But it does make sense if you're trying to draw the contrast to the king with the gold crown. Suddenly, man, I like this. Suddenly she sees the proper place of what's most valuable. And maybe she starts to get a glimpse herself of what's out in the world, the potential that's out in the world. Just like the brother is going crazy with the horns sounding for the hunt, suddenly she sees the potential in the world, and maybe being alone in the cabin in the woods isn't such an attractive thing to her anymore.
Yeah. No, I like that. Which then it goes, fairy tales always crack me up because the very next line it says, will you go with me to the castle and be my dear wife? And you're like, wow, that's all it takes? Do we want
Right
to test
there.
this out? Do we want to go on a couple dates?
You're not even going to check her Instagram account or anything like that?
Yeah, talk with the
You're
parents.
just going to dive right in.
Yeah, see how this is going to shape up in the next 25 years. I don't know. It's just funny. But to your point that beauty represents the ideal, it's a way of saying he saw the ideal woman standing before him. And so, again, when you read it and you're like, oh, this is happening way too fast, this is absurd. The absurdity is what's supposed to draw you to the idea that she was the ideal. He had the proper orientation of the most valuable thing. She was ideal. And so the obvious next step is to take her to the castle and to be the wife.
Yeah.
And then just as quickly as he asks her to be his wife, she says, oh, yes, but the fawn must come too. I could not leave him, right? And so it's this kind of,
Oh, yeah.
I got to hold on to the brother, right? And then, of course, the king says he'll remain with you as long as you live and, he'll lack nothing. And the fawn came with him. Again, trying to kind of keep with this context of coming of age. What did you make about her bringing the brother to the castle with them? Because that's not a normal. When you get married, your first thought is, "Hey, can my little brother come live with us?" Right? Do you think there's
Yeah,
anything
that sounds
deeper
like a
going on
great
there?
idea.
Right. What can go wrong?
No, well, practically he's still a fawn, right? But I do think she's continuing her orientation towards him as I do think it continues this whole idea of I still see him as a little boy, right? I still see him as this little helpless boy that he needs me.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And when maybe the whole point of the hunt is maybe he's starting to mature and grow, into a young man now.
Right.
But she still almost sees him as the fawn. I guess that's a way to say it, is she still sees him as the fawn. And of course, in the fairy tale, he's still literally the fawn because he's under the spell. But she very much still sees him that way.
Yeah, she's holding on to her maternal instinct over him. She still sees herself as a mother figure and caregiver for him. That's kind of what I got out of that also. So yeah, off to Act 3. Act 3 and the castle.
Yep, we have the royal wedding. She's now queen. And again, it's one of those things, besides the fact that he's a fawn, it feels like this could have been the ending of the story.
Right.
And it's not. There's the whole Act 3.
Again, here's that dividing line. It says, and they lived happily together for a long while. And so here's that chapter heading is the way I see this, is that, they lived in the castle for a while, everything's fine, but then here comes the wicked stepmother again.
Everything's fine except for the brother because he's still a fawn.
Yeah, I mean, like, she's the queen, that's great, but the brother's still a daggum deer.
Yeah, she's like, what are you complaining about? I give you fresh hay every night,
Yeah, exactly. But here comes the wicked stepmother, and this is one of those things that the one element that kept popping up in every section was this wicked stepmother. So I don't think it's a stretch to say that the story is fundamentally about some kind of cause and effect relationship between the stepmother and the lifelong development of the kids. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I mean, just the fact that she keeps coming back.
Yeah, yeah. And ultimately, spoiler, but they have to kill the witch in order to break the spell and live happily ever after. So it's definitely, she's the arc over all this, is the wicked stepmother or the witch, and is clearly what her spell that has stunted the growth of both of them on their way to becoming fully functional men and women in society, something like that.
Right, exactly. It says that in her heart, she had no peace because that she found out that the brother and sister are living happily in the castle. And it says her chief thought was how to bring misfortune on them. Like, this is a sadistic mother, right? Like, that's all she can think about is they're out of the house, whatever. I can't smack them around anymore. I can't feed them crumbs. And the fact that they made it through the wilderness and didn't get eaten by the beasts, that really, really bothers her. And all she can think about is how to bring misfortune. It's like, what kind of twisted person is this, right?
At night.
Yeah. Right. So here we have the introduction of a new character here. Now we have this daughter. So I guess a stepsister to the brother and sister, right? Who it describes as ugly as sin, which is, it says she's ugly as sin and had only one eye, right? And so this is the first time we're hearing about this, but her first words in this story is that she complains to her mom and says, I never had the chance of being queen, which is it's kind of a weird thing, because I'm assuming there's lots of women in the kingdom that didn't have a chance to be queen, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's right. These one or two sentences right here actually reveal a lot of why the mother is so malevolent, why she wishes such ill will, right?
Right.
Because I think we have a couple things. First of all, she has a daughter of her own, and her daughter, she's ugly as sin. I want to get to that in a minute. And she's complaining, I never had a chance to be queen. So what is the whole orientation of the stepmother? It's resentment, right?
Yeah.
I want what others have. Right. How come they have what my daughter doesn't have? And that, to me, becomes the whole motivation now that's revealed behind why this witch/stepmother has acted the way she's acted.
Right.
It's all out of resentment.
Yeah. And just that line, I never had the chance to be queen from the daughter, right? That's a statement of the world is unfair, right? Or the fates are against me, right? It's a way of thinking that the story is trying to capture there, just with that one little line. Because again, it's absurd. There's lots of women that weren't queen. Why would you let that bother you so bad? But it's this idea that the world is unfair. In psychology, it's the internal versus the external locus of control. Have you heard this? That if you have
no, you have to remind me.
Yeah, well, that you have an internal locus of control. You see how you interact with the world as under your control. If something bad befalls you, well, I could have done something different. I could have changed it. The external locus of control basically says I have no control over my life, and whether I succeed or fail, it's just the luck of the draw, right? And so the daughter's idea of, I never had the chance to be queen, is sort of this, the world is against me type of statement. I don't know. It plays to the idea of the external locus of control. I have no control over my life. It happens to me.
Well, okay, so she says, I never had a chance to be queen, and we both were like, well, yeah, lots of people didn't. But again, it's a fairy tale. This idea of king and queen, I think it's an ideal that's held out to everyone. You can be king of your own castle, right?
Yeah.
You can be queen of your own house.
Right.
And so there is that idea. It's not just like, well, look, there was maybe a dozen queens in Europe that time. Who knows? But I think it's a deeper idea of to grow up, to mature, to find a spouse, to have children. You are effectively, you have become queen, right?
Yeah.
You have a good life.
Right.
It's something like that. So I think it's actually, it occurred to me, it's saying something deeper. She's not just saying, I never had a chance to rule over a large kingdom.
Right.
She's actually saying, I've never had a chance to mature and have a family of my own.
Yeah.
Which ties back to this idea that, I hate to say that, but again, it's fairy tale. It says she was ugly as sin. Now, that's not just a comment on her physical looks.
Right.
Right.
Well, no more than the maiden being beautiful. That's not simply saying
Right.
that, man, she was hot. It's saying that she was ideal. And so if you're ugly as sin, then you are the exact opposite of the ideal.
Yeah, exactly. You basically, look, it says as sin for a reason.
Right.
You basically have, here's someone who has nothing to offer the world, right? And in
Yeah.
a fairy tale, in a simple story, how do you say that? You say that person was ugly as sin. We don't say that today, nor should you. But
Right.
that's what this is representing. Here's a person who has nothing to offer the world. And because of it, she has no family, right? She's probably been stunted maturity-wise herself because that's the way her mother operates. And so that's why she utters this statement that I've never had a chance to be queen.
Yeah.
And one other thing, I'd be remiss if I didn't point this out because it jumped out at me after reading this several times. Why does it say she was ugly as sin? She had only one eye. Oh, okay, that's really interesting.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Because we talked about one eye.
Yeah.
One eye sees the world one way. They're
Right.
the ideologue, and they can't see anything else.
Yeah.
And again, it's no mistake that here's another fairy tale with a person with one eye.
Right.
I got excited when that jumped off the page at me. I was
No,
like,
I
oh,
did
wow.
too. Yeah, it's that singular focus with no nuance, right? I'm not the queen because the world is against me. That's like a completely unnuanced assessment of the situation. And I think it's interesting that you'll notice that it can't be fixed by the witch's magic. Did you catch that? It's like the witch casts
Yeah,
a spell
yeah.
and makes her look like the queen, but it says she could not fix the eye. I mean, if you've got this magic that can make you look like someone else, surely we can make a little cosmetic eye there, right, with that same magic. But the witch's magic can't fix that, right? You can't fix the way she views the world.
Which tells you that's the way she views the world that can't be fixed.
Right.
It has nothing to do with physically missing an eye.
Well, it also go back a couple episodes where we said, as a parent, prepare your child for the road. Don't prepare the road for your child, right? Well, this is a perfect example of the witch, the stepmother, preparing the road for her child. So she doesn't actually do anything to change the way the stepdaughter views things. She doesn't fix the one eye. All she does is this cosmetic thing to make her look like a queen, instead of dealing with the fundamental problem, which is she views the world in this unnuanced, singular, laser-focused way. The world's against me, and she never addresses that. It's almost like she just gets out in front of it and says, don't worry, I'll make this better. I can make you queen. And so
I can fix this for
Yeah,
you.
and so she assumes the role of this queen without any knowledge, right? So she wants the title without any of the effort. And so to continue with the story, all she can do is lie in bed on one side, right? Which doesn't sound like a win to me,
Yeah.
You just have to lay in bed and only lay on one side so the king doesn't see your missing eye, right? And so it's this, that sounds miserable, but it's a title only. There's virtually no interaction with the king. There's no indication that she does anything queenly, right? She doesn't interact with the kingdom at all, right? She just lays in bed on one side to hide the fact that she is missing an eye. So I just think that's a great image.
And to take it one step further, it's the same thing as the tree with silver leaves and golden apples in the previous fairy tale.
Oh, yeah.
It's wisdom in the hands of fools.
Yeah.
Watch them fumble it away.
Right,
Yeah. So She has the appearance of being a queen, but like you said, all she can do is lay there. There's nothing she can do with it, right? Because you placed wisdom in the hands of a foolish person.
Yeah, so you're stuck in the bed.
Of an ideologue.
Right.
And so there's literally nothing they can do, right?
Yeah,
They're just going to fumble
that's great.
it away. All right, so let's back up for a second and then wrap all this up, because let's talk about how One Eye actually gets in the castle in the first place. So really quick, the queen, the real queen, has a baby, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the king was out hunting, and the witch sees this as an opportunity to swap her daughter with the queen. So the witch takes the form of a chambermaid and makes her daughter the queen, and they tell the real queen to go into the bathroom. And it's really weird. They make this great fire so she's suffocates almost,
right.
And she's really weak. And you almost get this picture that she's almost like a shadow of herself walking around. So now you have the queens swapped, mm-hmm. and the real queen only comes out at night. And like we said, One-Eye Queen, all she can do is lay in the bed, because if she does anything else, she will reveal the fact that she only has one eye.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Right.
And so then as the story resolves, another person sees the real queen, kind of this shadow of herself. It's really odd, going in and nursing the child every night. And then we have the same step of 3. The first night she says something like, 2 more times I'll come and then I have to go. Mm-hmm. And then she comes again and says, I'll come 1 more night and then I'm going to be gone. And then you get the idea that she thinks this is all ending, right?
Right.
She's going to die. She's not going to make it. But the third time, the king catches word that this strange woman is going in and nursing the child every night. So the king hides, and he actually sees her, and he understands that this is the real queen.
Right.
Not the imposter lying in bed all day, right?
Right. Yeah.
All right. So I know that was really fast, and there was a lot there.
This was the hardest act for me, right? The sister is suffocated by the wicked witch, but her spirit, still comes at night to tend the baby, and the brother, the fawn, right? And it was the hardest for me to kind of wrap my head around what this meant, because it's clearly, the fact that the sister is suffocated by the malevolence of the witch, I think that's an interesting image, that whatever the witch did all the way back at the beginning still has a grip on the sister, and it suffocates her as a mother. It's almost like what happened to her as a child affected her as a mother. And you see this in real life, unfortunate victims of abuse, things like that. They have trouble adjusting to a normal relationship, normal marriage, motherhood, fatherhood, right? And I don't know, it's like that malevolent hand reaches out from the past and continues to suffocate them. At least that's the way I saw the bathroom scene, where she's suffocated by the wicked witch. She turns up the fire, and it doesn't really say she dies. That's the implication. But at the very least, she is out of sight, and all that's left is her spirit.
Yes, it's implied that she's almost kind of this weak shadow of her former self, maybe in kind of turning her stepsister into the queen. Maybe there's something about like she's no longer even recognizable. So she's like, well, now if I go into the king, he's going to throw me out because I just look like this haggard, worn out, sickly person and not the queen. It was odd. It was hard to know what to make of, building the fire under the tub. And
right.
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
There's something about the ghost of her showing up, because at midnight every night, the maternal spirit of the sister, right, arrives and continues to care for the baby and the deer and the brother, right? If the ugly stepsister was just trying to assume the role of the queen without any of the knowledge or responsibility, then the sister is all the responsibility without the corresponding title.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and it shows that the real queen was always more interested in caring for her people than for the display of living in the castle as a figurehead, which is what the ugly stepsister wanted, right? That's all she wanted, was to be the figurehead.
Yeah.
And so it's this juxtaposition of these two ideas is the way I kind of viewed that.
Well, it's really, so this, I just noticed this. What is the thing that triggers the king to recognize her? Is he watches her that last night, and he heard her say, "My child, my fawn, this once I come to see, this once I come, and now the end must be." And then it says the king could not contain himself any longer because he rushed towards her, saying, "You are no other than my dear wife." And it's like, okay, what's the thing that triggered him to recognize her as his real wife. It's her care for the fawn.
Yeah. It's the inner beauty.
So it's
yes.
interesting. Yeah, it's interesting that, so this care for the fawn that almost has like, use that term again, like infantilized her brother, but it also ends up being the thing that triggers, the king says, this has to be my wife.
Yeah.
Not the good for nothing laying around in the bed. Like that's the care, the inner beauty, right?
Yeah.
This is the only person that cares for this stupid deer that's running around my castle every day.
Yeah, that I can't get rid of, right? It has echoes of Solomon, right? The story about the two women that were arguing over the baby.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's sort of like Solomon says, well, let's cut him in half. Well, then the real mother is the one who steps forward and says, absolutely not, it's her child. Because she would rather see the child be given to somebody else than obviously to be murdered. And so there's a little bit of those echoes there. I like that. That's neat.
So it's that inner beauty that he actually sees. You know? And that's captured again in laying eyes on her and saying he saw the most beautiful maiden he's ever seen. Again, that connection to the divine, the inner beauty, everything about her. And that's what he recognizes as opposed to the one eye laying in the bed every day doing nothing. To your point, for the people in the kingdom, like she's not doing anything, right?
Right, yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah. So at the end of this story, it kind of looks like, despite the messed up upbringing of the wicked stepmother, the sister kind of overcomes the struggles of childhood and adolescence and rose to become the ideal woman. That's what the queen represents, right? And so her concern is, her concern is for others, not her title, which is why only she can properly wear the crown. So there's that crown image again. It's almost like she saw the ideal in the king, that she saw the proper place for the crown, and she learned the proper orientation for herself as a queen. It wasn't the figurehead. It wasn't living in this lavish castle. It was caring for the people that needed caring for. Her child, her brother, and again, this represents society. Yeah. So the weak, the people that can't defend themselves, right? That's what the queen represents. And now she properly wears the crown to kind of bring this to full circle.
Yeah, I guess it does start to all tie together and make sense. And here, let me read the very last part, and then we can kind of get overall thoughts. So the king figures out what's going on. He brings the wicked stepmother and the daughter to judgment. Now, it's interesting because he says the daughter was sent away to the woods where she was devoured by wild beasts. Now, it's interesting because that's what her mother wanted for the brother and the sister.
Intended for the other kids, right.
Yeah, so it's that thing if it's like, you know, be careful what you wish for. So the stepdaughter was sent out. She's devoured in the woods, and it says the witch was burned because I guess that's what you do with witches.
Absolutely.
You burn them, right? Yeah. But then it's almost like the very last sentence said, as soon as her body was in ashes, the spell was removed from the fawn, and he becomes the brother again.
Right.
The brother's finally not this stupid deer anymore, right? It's very end, but the spell is broken. And now the sister and the brother lived happily ever after in the castle until the end. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's so that very end thing, that's like, I get that they burn the witch because that's what you do. But there's something about the death of the wicked stepmother that brings the brother back. I don't know. I wrestled with that because I want to go back to this idea about the brother and sister representing the rational and the primitive, instinctual, impulsive part of us, right? And so once that wicked stepmother's grip is gone, once they've understood the proper orientation of the way to live a full life, to rise up to their higher calling, then everything goes back to normal. It's almost like now the brother can properly be the brother, the sister can properly be the sister. That's where I really got that idea that those are two separate parts of the same person. You know, that whole idea of the instinctual part and the rational part. That's where I kind of got that.
Yeah.
Because now they kind of come together into a fully integrated person at the end. I don't know.
Yeah, I still go back to this idea that somehow the spell was to thwart the development of both of them toward adulthood. And you could see it easily in the brother to begin with because he's turned into this helpless fawn, right? Led around by his sister.
Yeah.
I think you can see it in the sister in that what does the witch try to take from her? Well, she tries to take her queenhood, right? She tries to take her child. She So she strips her of everything that it meant to be the ideal woman, basically, right?
Mm-hmm.
She strips her of all that. And so somehow I think this is a story about, and look, I think you said it, like childhood trauma can thwart your maturity toward adulthood.
Yeah.
And so it's something like that. The spell is the trauma that she inflicted on these stepchildren, but it hit him in different ways. So at the beginning, she's just thinking it's simple, right? I'm going to send them into the woods and they're going to get eaten, which that's what happens to her own daughter.
Yeah.
But it hits them different ways because they're different kinds of personalities, right? So I don't know. That's the closest I've come to tying it all together, I guess.
Okay, so you kind of look at it as a cause and effect theory, right? That you see how the story of how the lack of proper mother figure hurts boys and girls in different ways, right? Something like that.
Yeah, you could say that.
Yeah. So the first section implies that in early development, boys are going to have trouble controlling their animal impulses or something like that, and that girls are going to have trouble understanding or at least trying to control the impulses of their male counterpart, something like that. So you're following it through saying that childhood trauma affects us in different ways, and you follow the story of the brother and the sister out that way. I think that may be it also. Like we said at the beginning, there's more than one way to view these things, and that's why a well-crafted story, I just love it because it can be seen so many different ways. It's two different theories on how to view this, and both of them kind of work. Both of them also have the limitation of saying it just doesn't fit perfectly. I just don't get that Lego click when I pop either one of those ideas in. You know what I mean? Maybe there's a better theory out there. I'd love to hear somebody else's. A unifying theory that goes through this entire story and ties the entire narrative together. I don't know.
Yeah, at different layers, both of these things could be true. I also think this is one where I could read this 6 months from now and get something not completely different, but something completely different could jump out at you and you go, oh yeah, okay, this might be the unifying pattern that ties all this together. Because there's a lot going on in this one.
Oh yeah. Even if you don't have the unifying pattern, this is a great story because this is one of those things where so many of the details, whether it's the tiger, the wolf, and the fawn, whether it's the golden girdle, whether it's the suffocating fire, the wilderness, all these things are going to pop in your head. This is why I laid up at 2 a.m, by the way, is so many of these little images were popping in my head and were starting to kind of coalesce and make sense. But even if they don't, like I said, you don't have a grand unifying narrative, you at least have these really cool images. It's a great story for how to see in the symbolic way, the way that symbolic thinking is helpful in analyzing a story, and that's what kind of why we dig into all these fairy tales.
Yeah. And all the little details. Once you get the symbolism down, these little details jump out at you and you realize, and by the way, I was just reading a book that is basically saying the same thing about the Bible. It's like once you get the narrative down, it's like every little detail is there for a reason.
Right.
And we've said this before, like if there's a little detail in a story, especially in the Old Testament, that you're like, well, I don't even know what that means. It's like, man, pick at that for a while because there's some gold there. There's some gold there.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so there you go, man. That was just like most of our conversations. They actually kind of lead me to a clearer understanding, and I know more about it. I know it's easy to probably hear this and think that we've got all this kind of laid out, and trust me, we do not have. We have notes, but we don't have outlines.
No.
And, you know what I mean? This is a very organic conversation, and so at the end of it, I'm always kind of blown away. So what we would love is to have your opinion on it, because again, I don't think I just wanted that nice puzzle piece click that ties it all together, and maybe we didn't completely get there, but I guarantee you one of our listeners could help us out and kind of make that a little bit more clearer narrative, maybe. I don't know. That's the thought, at least.
Yeah, it always amazes me that I think I've got it figured out, and then we actually hit record, and then all these other things start falling into place too. And so, yeah, it's always fun. And next episode, we are going to do, this is going to be a good one. It's the Nix of the Mill Pond.
Oh, yeah. I think this is my favorite one. This is one where the puzzle piece really does click in a very satisfying way once you understand it. Yeah. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah. The Nix of the Mill Pond. If you want to read ahead, you can go ahead and Google it.
Yeah, do your homework
there. By the way, a Nix is like a water spirit. Okay, so
yeah, I didn't know what that was.
Next episode.
Had to check that out. I can't wait. That'll be a good episode.
Yeah, and if you are enjoying these conversations and you have friends that you think would like it, please pass this podcast on to other people, specifically this series, because it's a little different than what we normally do. But tell your friends, like, subscribe, and we would love to hear from you. And we will talk to you next time when we discuss the Nicks of the Mill Pond.
All right, we'll see you.